remember reading this book, and they say it's called the Rise of the Irate Customer. And they say it's largely driven by two things, right? There's a lack of empathy, but also this unrealistic expectation of immediacy. And hats off to you managers that are here. I know how many emails you get in your inbox, and very few of them are saying, hey, you're doing a great job. No, what they're saying is, I've got a problem and you need to fix it, and you need to fix it now.
Most people are not equipped to understand the seemingly endless facets of an HOA. That's why we're here, to help you become uncommonly prepared to serve your HOA. Whether you're a board member or a manager, join us in the Uncommon Area.
Welcome to the Uncommon Area. I am Matthew Holbrook, and this episode is titled The Evolution of HOAs, Where We Have Been and Where We Are Going. And I am joined by attorney Steve Tinnelly of the Tinnelly Law Group. And Steve and I have a very engaging conversation all around the trends that have developed in HOAs and looking forward to what are the trends that we anticipate are coming as to how HOAs operate and even what is happening from a legal and governmental perspective with HOAs. Steve and I had the opportunity to record this episode in front of a live audience of HOA board members, and we did so at the Marconi Museum in Tustin, California. Just a beautiful setting and just a great environment to record a podcast. So I hope that you get a chance to check out this episode, and I hope that it is helpful for you. Welcome to the Uncommon Area. I'm Matthew Holbrook, and our topic here today is all around what are the trends in HOAs in the United States of America? How have things changed in recent years, and where do we see the changes going? Joining me for this episode is Steve Tinnelly of the Tinnelly Law Group. So appreciate you being part of this episode,
Happy to be
Steve.
here, Matthew. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, why don't we dive into this? And you are an attorney. You've been doing this for a long time. We're not going to make this all about legal questions, but I do want to kind of start off with a broad topic, and that is, how have you seen the perspective of government towards HOAs change in recent years, and kind of how would you read the trajectory of where things are going just in that concept? And I think as part of that, and then I'll let you respond, how the government views HOAs has a huge impact on where legislation goes and how that affects how we can live and manage HOAs.
Yeah, that's a big one, and it's a great one. So it's been interesting for me when I first entered the industry, and you think about, what are these HOAs? What are we representing? Well, this is a beautiful idea. You know, cities and counties are not as responsive as they used to be. The idea of public parks, public pools, and those types of facilities, they're not really responsive to them. So you had developers say, hey, we're going to privatize the amenities. We want to really start upping the residential product throughout the nation, not just California. And what we're going to do is we're going to have these private corporations. We're going to have these private corporations that are going to be owned, and they're going to elect amongst them the best and the brightest, right, to serve as volunteers on their board. And they're going to be self-regulating. They're going to control themselves. And that was the idea when they were first developed. But fast forward to where we are now, the trajectory went from, okay, private corporations, not so much. You're actually housing providers now. So you have disability and discrimination laws that you have to deal with. And where we are now, where the legislature is going, they really look at us as quasi-governments, mini governments. So while all the autonomy that we used to be able to enjoy as HOAs to regulate our own documents, to vote on what kind of rules we want, the legislature really isn't giving us that freedom anymore. And I don't anticipate that trajectory changes. They're going to regulate us on high from Sacramento, just like they do every other county or city within California. So I think board members are going to become increasingly frustrated, if they're not already, that every year they're having to respond to some new law or some new thing that kind of takes away the autonomy and kind of that personal decision and personal choice for their community that they used to enjoy.
So that's job security for somebody like you.
Yeah, it's great for us as attorneys. Absolutely. Yeah. Keep adding to the code, keep adding regulations. And in some parts, I understand it. If you think about it, I mean, your day-to-day experience with your HOA and the management company that's doing that, I mean, that affects your day-to-day life. But the legislature is taking it even further than that, which is why we've seen so many bills about rights of assembly and speech, all of these things that kind of track First Amendment rights. They're all making their way into our statute.
So do you see HOA communities moving more towards kind of an environment like a rental community might be, where there's just significantly more regulation and, as you've said, a lot less autonomy of individual boards.
Absolutely. I mean, the balcony bill that we've seen recently, that was in response to an apartment collapse. It wasn't even an HOA scenario. And they're looking at us and they're saying this, no, the idea that you guys can regulate yourselves, not so much. We need to replace that with code. So, I mean, every year we have half a dozen to a dozen bills that are proposed by the legislature. And it's been that way since I've been in this industry for 13 years. And I don't see that slowing down at all.
And it's not going to be helped by what happened in Florida a couple of years ago with the Champlain Towers event.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on just how that has impacted the industry as a whole, and what we can expect where it might continue to have an effect?
I mean, it's a huge impact. I mean, obviously, sometimes we work with boards or work with, the volunteer leadership of a community, and they're always kind of hesitant because there's financial costs associated with it, right? So we always joke, a lot of board members think that their job is to keep assessments low, right? And really what the job is to maintain assets, right? That's what we're here to do. We're here to maintain the infrastructure, and how good we are at maintaining that is what kind of keeps our assessments low. So I think, unfortunately, what happened in Berkeley with the balcony collapse, and now we've got Champlain Towers and Surfside, it's kind of kicked the legislature into the fact that a lot of board members really aren't embracing the idea that you need to maintain these physical assets, especially in a condominium environment where health and safety is concerned, in a way that isn't going to cause a problem and not just defer maintenance and do those types of things. So in some respects, I kind of like that trend. I kind of like board members really embracing a bigger picture of what it is that they're doing, not just trying to keep, their assessment levels maybe artificially low. But unfortunately, I think it's going to trigger more legislation. Like in Florida, I think they just passed a bill, or they proposed a bill that requires associations to be 100% reserve funded.
Wow.
All the time. I mean, I don't know how many people here tonight, their community is 100% funded. If you are, take my card. I'd love to work with you. But that's just the nature of it. So some good things, some bad things, but big picture, I think anything we can learn from it is that really, what are we here to do? We're here to maintain assets and make sure everything is structurally sound, and that we're doing the maintenance and the repairs when we need to.
Do you think culturally, HOA board members today are more sensitive to safety issues than they might have been a couple of years ago prior to that event? Or do you think that that's not really an impact?
Well, I do, and you probably feel it when you're onboarding clients, right? And I'm sure you're giving them the whole introductory lesson, the crash course one-on-one, and this whole idea of fiduciary comes up and personal liability. And it's if you're a volunteer director, I'm not getting paid for this. This is the most popular job in my community. And at the same time, I don't want to be sued personally because I made a bad decision. So I think culturally, they are more sensitive. I think they are paying more attention, which I do think there is some silver lining to that big picture on what it is we're here to do.
Yeah. Well, shifting gears a little bit, but maybe staying in the legal vein just a little bit, new legislation that might be one of the more talked about legislations in California relates to HOA elections. Maybe you can just give us a quick summary of what that's about, and then I'm more interested even in what do you see the impact of that being?
Yeah, absolutely. So for a while, our industry, and I'm sure you've advocated on behalf of your clients too, it's really tough to conduct elections, largely because of membership apathy. We had to use this arcane double secret envelope voting system. A lot of the quorum requirements, which is a fancy word, I'm not going to explain it, made it such that a lot of associations couldn't even hold their annual meetings. So you just have directors that continue to serve, and it really wasn't a representative sample of what people wanted in terms of those decisions. So for years now, the legislature has taken new bills on to kind of combat that. And as a result of that, we have reduced quorum requirements now that allow for associations to be able to hold their annual meetings at a much lower threshold of participation, which is great. And the big thing, which has been defeated 3 times until it finally got passed this year, was we're now actually going to be able to vote electronically. So no paper ballots. And the whole idea behind that is to increase membership awareness. I know our mailbox is always overstuffed. It's kind of gone by the waist heap. I mean, when are we going to get the mail? What's in the mail? But if you can send me something, if you can send me a QR code, I can do that, and I conduct it, and I can fill out the ballot on my cell phone or on my computer. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's going to significantly increase participation in elections, make quorum a whole lot easier to meet, and you will end up with a better representation of the community.
Definitely. Well, I'm sure your managers get frustrated at times, right? Because a lot of people complain what's going on and say, well, why don't you get involved? Well, I didn't know that this was happening. Well, we mailed it to you. Well,
Yeah.
who goes to the mail anymore? I mean, did you email it? No, we're not allowed to do that. The legislature said you won't. And I heard this from a colleague, an industry colleague, and he said that one of the biggest opponents of the bill for several times since it's been passed has been the company that actually supplies paper ballots for California elections. And they were concerned about HOAs going electronic first, and inevitably California is going to go that way.
Interesting.
And, yeah.
So do you see any concerns with respect to more elections being challenged in HOAs, or concerns about elections being conducted properly because of this? Or do you think that this will actually facilitate and make things go more smoothly?
I mean, I'm less concerned. I mean, think about the financial transactions that members conduct electronically all the time. And right now we have a system with double secret envelopes that requires a lot of these individual board members to go door to door. Then we have this arcane proxy system because I'm not in town. Might be a rental property or whatever the circumstance is. So I'm actually less concerned. And the statute has some protections in there too, as the integrity of the data that has to be kept. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah. I'm even thinking, so you could do this, as you mentioned, with a QR code, have people access their ballot that way or by a link of some kind. I'm thinking with even where we've moved as a management company to having the ability to send out mass texts and other forms of communication that people are used to accessing. If you're in a situation where you are just short of quorum, whereas in the past you're out knocking on doors, you can just send out a mass text to everybody, say, hey, respond. You can literally sit there and watch the votes come in.
Absolutely. And that's so common sense, especially your company. I know how tech savvy you are and the investments that you made. I mean, you've got to welcome this type of technology because you know what you can leverage in terms of actually getting the community together to understand what's happening. Everybody needs to participate. Cast the ballot.
Yeah. So speaking of technology, we all know that in the last 4 years or so, there's been a significant shift towards Zoom in general for all of us in every way, but specifically with respect to board meetings. And I know this would be an area where I've actually witnessed, I think, a lot of things that are just changing the way that we do business in HOAs that just flows out of the reality of boards often meeting by Zoom. I'll add my 2 cents in a minute, but what's your perspective on how has Zoom culturally changed HOAs?
Well, I mean, it's definitely helped me in my personal situation. I mean, my wife here, we have 4 little kids. We have clients from San Diego to Sacramento, and having to go to client meetings after hours, a lot of times I wasn't home. So being able to patch into a Zoom meeting, that's a beautiful thing. And I say that because I know there's a lot of board members say, I would love to get involved, but can we do an executive session over lunch hour? Mm-hmm. Why does it have to be from 6 to 8 and then we got to keep going to 10? So I think a lot of times there's people that want to get involved and just don't have the freedom of time in order to do that. So if we're able to conduct things by Zoom, I think it increases the pool of potential people that want to get involved in their community's leadership. And I think that's always a good thing. Culturally, honestly, I don't think it's that big of an issue. Sometimes our clients face what I call prickly pears during their homeowner forum that want to railroad the board meeting and not be as productive as possible or respectful as possible. So I know what a godsend it is just to hit that little mute button on Zoom. So I guess, I don't know, if anything, it's made the meetings go a little bit more professionally. I've seen them get conducted quicker, more get done, more motions get made and passed than in an auditorium where there's a bunch of people that are talking and maybe have a different agenda.
I mostly agree with you. I wish I totally agreed with you.
Okay.
So like just for example, for tomorrow, I will be I will meet with a board in Sacramento, then in San Francisco, and then 2 later here in Orange County. Prior to Zoom, that wasn't happening.
Exactly.
So there is definitely a benefit there. I also agree with you on the idea that I think meetings tend to be more efficient and effective by Zoom because you lose some of the chit chat and some of the things that might delay or make meetings go a lot longer. So they tend to be, I think, more professional, better, more effective. So I would agree with you on all of that. And we're speaking in generalities here. Mm-hmm. There's obviously exceptions to all of this. The part of this that concerns me and that I see cracks is Zoom does compromise relationships.
Definitely.
Relationships between board members, relationships between board and management, relationships between boards and homeowners. And I do think that when we're talking about a community where people live, where you have your neighbors right next to you, those types of relationships are really, really important just to the natural flow of how you live in your community. And board meetings are a natural place of connection and relationship building. And when you put it to Zoom, there is a sterilization of that opportunity. And I think that aspect, there's a lot of positive aspects of Zoom. I think that aspect is just one to be aware of, that maybe there's other ways that associations need to be more proactive in thinking, how do we create opportunities for those relationship dynamics?
No, I agree with you there. Absolutely. Well, especially for me as a counselor, right? What I sell is, you can't touch it. It's not tangible. It's trust. So going to a meeting, being able to look the board in the eye, you will actually have that conversation with them. A lot of times it's way more powerful when you're able to get your message across. But yeah, I've been at a number of meetings where you have a homeowner that's upset or something. And then after the meeting concludes, when they're walking out to the parking lot, the homeowner finally says, "Hey, board member, can we figure this out?" Sure. And 5 minutes later, the problem is solved. Yep. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I've seen that often as well. And sometimes you might even have a board meeting just between the board and the manager, where there's some difficult things they're talking through, and maybe the manager ends up staying after, talking to one of the board members, and the same kind of thing. You figure something out in that dynamic. Yeah,
you go offline. No, I hear you. Yeah, the Zoom is definitely sterile, definitely more of an arm's length transaction. I have one client that started out doing Zoom. They had me go to every one of their board meetings. They're in Newport Beach, really talented board, motivated board. They tried the Zoom thing and they realized, you know what, this is kind of strange. Now what they're doing is they're doing a hybrid approach. They're meeting in person and then opening up Zoom for anybody who can't make it. And I think that's the porridge is just right for them in that community with that.
Yeah. So I want to be careful. I don't want to be entirely anti-Zoom at all, but I would want to underline that for associations that are primarily meeting by Zoom, that there should be an awareness of what is being compromised by that from the social dynamic, and being super intentional about how do we supplement this in other ways. Because I do think that the social fabric within the community that the association can facilitate and promote is a really important element of how do you shift that HOA from being the bad guy that everybody hates to maybe being something that is a positive within the community. To that end, one of the things I've noted, and I've actually talked about this on other podcasts, but the reality that we live in a culture today where there is a ever decreasing element of civility in how we interact with each other. And that's just my nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
More bluntly, people in general tend to be freer to be mean, if you want to put it that way. Zoom might even encourage that a little bit further. So I guess before I dive into some of my perspective on that, how do you, one, respond to my observation that that's where we are culturally? And two, how is that impacting boards and communities and this industry as a whole?
Yeah, it's an unfortunate development. I've seen it since, honestly, the wake of the pandemic. There's always been challenges, but after the pandemic, it skyrocketed, so much so that our firm, we put on a bunch of educational programs. I think our most popular program within the last 18 months has been de-escalation in your community. And unfortunately, I think this year we've had half a dozen to a dozen restraining orders we've had to file on behalf of our clients because homeowners are getting that aggro, to use the legal term. And I remember reading this book, and they say it's called The Rise of the Irate Customer. They say it's largely driven by two things, right? There's a lack of empathy, but also this unrealistic expectation of immediacy. And hats off to you managers that are here. I know how many emails you get in your inbox, and very few of them are saying, "Hey, you're doing a great job." No, what they're saying is, "I've got a problem and you need to fix it, and you need to fix it now. I want my problem solved now, as fast as one of these Ferraris that are here," right? So if I could order a belt for tonight's event last night and it's on my door at 4 a.m., why can't you issue me a new pool pass, by 3 o'clock today? And they just continue to kind of jam that home. And as a result of that, I think people, because there's less face-to-face interaction, they are what we call the keyboard assassins. They just send the most vitriolic and terrible things they possibly can. And unfortunately, a lot of times it falls on the board, and particularly the manager of the community have to field that all day long. And that's an unfortunate thing.
Yeah. I think that there's a challenge there. And again, it kind of flows off of the Zoom conversation, but we have this downward trajectory of the social fabric in a community. And so that plays out. I have seen more tension between board members and homeowners, and between homeowners, board members, and managers, and in every interpersonal dynamic. And that tension isn't good for the community. It's also not good for the industry. So test question, Steve. According to CAI, you have any idea what the average manager tenure is in this business?
I'd put it at less than 3 years.
Yeah, CAI publishes it at about 18 months, is about how long the average manager lasts in this business. I'm ecstatic about our managers. Our average tenure at Action is about 6 years, and that's something we're really proud of, 4 times what the industry average is. But I'm concerned that these dynamics push really hard against somebody in that role wanting to continue doing that job for very long.
Definitely.
And I see the 18 months, you can't go down a whole lot further from that as far as what your tenure is. And I see that happening potentially in the industry.
Yeah. I remember reading a CAI study. It's part of our program. I quoted, it was something like, it was a survey of, what was the biggest contributor to a manager's job dissatisfaction? It's something like 70% said it was unrealistic demands from rude homeowners, right? And we have on our team, our director of business development, former 20-year manager, was in the industry, and she would tell me at her peak, she had 300 emails a day. 295 of them were telling her how awful she was, how awful the HOA was, the board was. And that's tough for anybody to stomach.
Yeah. So that's kind of the negative perspective on this. And I don't want to make this all about lamenting how our business is. But I think that there's an opportunity there for communities to be successful where they find ways that the manager and the board can partner together in being intentional and proactive about the communication to set those expectations with the homeowners. And there has to be kind of this team approach between management and the board to say, we want to very intentionally and proactively set expectations with our homeowners so that we can manage those expectations. And that's good for the board, it's good for the homeowners, but it's also good for the manager in that you're not putting them in a situation where they're going to be feeling beaten down.
It's good for everybody. I mean, a lot of times homeowners, we find if their expectation was properly managed at the beginning, rather than someone being afraid to tell them what they didn't want to hear, the whole thing could have been avoided. So absolutely. I think there's an opportunity to increase that. I think so many clients that we see, unfortunately, get into this reactive position where they're waiting for problems and then responding to them. I feel like, hey, you can take this bull by the horns here and be more proactive in your communication style and kind of leveraging the connections within this community such that people are actually, wow, this is nice. This didn't come. I didn't have to submit a complaint or a concern to the HOA for someone to respond to me. They're actually pushing information to me that actually makes me feel good about where I live.
We have, I've been in this business for 29 years. And my first 6 months at Action, the emphasis was all around communication, and you have to communicate. But I would argue that the necessity and the importance of being proactive in that communication is way, way more today than it ever was before.
Absolutely.
And so having discussions, one of the things we've done just recently in our company, when we're having, let's say, like senior management discussion meetings, I've actually appointed somebody whose responsibility it is to listen in on those meetings with the objective of what needs to be communicated to everybody else based on what this conversation is.
That's interesting.
And so it's that person's job to listen with the perspective of what do we have to communicate. I'm just making this up right now, but I wonder how that applies even in a board sense, that you have your board president and treasurer, secretary. Maybe it's your board member at large who doesn't have a defined job otherwise. And maybe you say, hey, board member at large, your job is to listen in on the meeting as you participate and find opportunities.
Well,
what do we need to communicate?
to bring it back to where we started and looking at the quasi-government model, I mean, there's downsides to that, but there's merit to that because it's not just transactions that we're engaging in. There is a public relations and a political component to everything that the board does. And the most effective boards in their governance structure understand this. They know how to message to their community. They know how to celebrate those wins and to have, that member at large, right? That non-officer position, the communications chair, the press secretary, whatever the circumstance is, to really push that information out to let people know what's going on. And I think that's going to go a long way.
Yeah. And all of that is part of setting expectations, making people feel connected and helping people be connected in their own way. Sometimes people are not receptive to hearing updates and communication at a particular moment, but if they know where to go to access that information, or it's being provided in multiple different ways, text message, email, board meeting announcements, for certain things, holding town forums, all of this, just find ways to intentionally communicate way more than you think that you have to.
Absolutely.
With that, I've been thinking a lot in recent years about the evolution of the role of a community manager. And this might feel a little inside baseball, but I would argue that for board members, they play a vital role in kind of what the trajectory is and how things evolve for managers and how they're able to service. So we talked about this a little bit. I was commenting that to be a manager, as things have historically been in the business, you kind of need to have a unicorn. You need to have somebody who is radically detail-oriented, super organized, and can just process a super high level of tasks. And you have to have somebody who is relational and has leadership skills and really high levels of customer service. Oftentimes, those two buckets of talents don't go together, but that's what we're looking for with a community manager. I guess, first of all, would you agree with my assessment of the role?
Absolutely. It's a remarkable position to be in. I mean, we face similar aspects in terms of looking for attorneys. I mean, when I'm hiring, we get some of the brightest attorneys fresh out of school. You're well-credentialed. You can do the work. You would do a fantastic job, but there's no way I could sit you with a board and have them feel confident in what you're doing, not because you don't know what you're doing, because you don't possess that social intelligence, that relationability, that leadership skill, and it's a challenge. And to have both sides of the brain there, you're right, it's a unicorn. I think that's a perfect way to put it.
So what I'm thinking now is we're talking about what's changing in the industry, what's changing in what happens with HOAs. I believe that there is a race to figure out how to leverage technology in such a way that split between those two different skill sets can lean more one way than the other. In other words, I do think that there can be a lot of the role that can be either automated or facilitated more readily through technology applications that can pull some of that burden, so you don't need somebody who is quite so detail-oriented, and you could put somebody into those roles that might be better at managing the people, leading the big picture, driving towards large goals, acting in a more executive kind of a role, as opposed to in just somebody who has to do all these smaller tasks. Those tasks still have to be done, but I think that there might be an opportunity to find solutions to solve those tasks, and that would free up the pool of what kinds of people could be successful as a manager.
I make the analogy when we're educating our clients, sometimes the board, very well-intentioned, wants to get in the day-to-day, and they realize sometimes that's counterproductive. Just like any corporate board, you're the board, you set policy at a high level, you can send the ship on a direction, manager is the CEO, but you're right, there's like a COO component to that as well, and it's rare that you see a CEO, COO hybrid. So if there's a way to bifurcate that and have somebody that's more operations and administrative focused to allow someone that possesses those leadership skills, I think that's a great direction to move in.
If I had to wear the COO hat at Action, we'd be in a lot of trouble. So yeah I agree.
Yeah, I believe you.
My team here would affirm that. I'm also curious as to your perspective on where the industry is going. How would you rate where the HOA industry is from a maturity standpoint? How developed is the HOA industry compared to, let's just say, the rest of the world at large?
Well, I know. I mean, yeah, I think we're still kind of back in the 80s in terms of, and the rest of the world is in, 2024 and beyond. And I think that's an unfortunate thing. Unfortunately, I think a lot of it is actually kind of a victim of the statutory scheme that we're in. I mean, now we finally have electronic voting, but the way in which we have to meet, the notices that have to be sent out, these disclosures, I think a lot of that is driven that way. But I think there's definitely opportunities for evolution, for advancement. I mean, you've been in the industry longer than I have. I have a much shorter snapshot. But in the 13 years that I've been doing it, from where it was initially to where it is now, I think it's been somewhat on a bell curve in terms of what I've been able to see. And I hope that trajectory continues.
Yeah. And so more specifically, I'm curious as I watch where things go in the industry. Elections would just be one example, but I think that there have been some significant steps forward with the leveraging of technology, with how we look at financial management, with how we look at even producing reserve studies, a lot of other things in the industry, because of the proliferation of information and how that goes out to board members and to management companies. People are looking around and saying, why are you doing things like this for HOAs when everybody else is doing it like over here? And we're seeing that gap starting to close at a faster rate. We still have a long ways to go as an industry, but I do see the gap closing in the industry. And I think that because there's just going to be there is more visibility and awareness as to what's happening on a broader level.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm the same way. I mean, everybody knows HOAs now. It's funny. We even have Super Bowl commercials through Progressive for HOAs. I see you've met Cynthia, right?
Yeah.
That whole commercial. So, it's the predominant housing model. And I think the right people are starting to pay attention. It's a great space to be in, but you're right. I think it's definitely advancing and I hope the trend continues.
Yeah. Do you have any concerns with, this is kind of a question broader in life, but apply it to the HOAs, to the development of technology down to, everybody wants to talk about AI, but even we are not far from you making a phone call and you would have no idea if you're talking to a real person or to an AI. That's going to invade all of our lives in a whole variety of ways. But I guess from the service standpoint, do you have any perspective on what that impact might be for how we service homeowners and what the overall level of service might be?
I think you just have to be tactful with how you implement it, right? In a circumstance where there's an experience, it's a very simple transaction, a pool key, register a new car, or something along those lines. Absolutely. But if it's something where someone's, hey, I need somebody to understand what it is that I'm communicating and be able to kind of delve into that empathy and solve me and follow up and reassure me, I think it's going to be a challenge if you start trying to go too far too quickly on that. And I think it's just going to be smaller bites at the apple. In our practice, we joke. I mean, there's records now of a couple attorneys getting disbarred because they filed pleadings in a court of law citing cases that didn't exist because they told an AI bot to write it for them. I'm sure it's going to get there. It's going to ultimately do that. But I mean, there's going to be ways for us to leverage it. And I think if you start using it in ways that make sense, if anything, I think it's going to make it even more powerful, though, when there is that opportunity for human connection. I mean, it's all text, it's all things all the time. Some of the most impactful moments I've had with clients are, hey, I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to call you. I'm going to check in on you. How are you doing?
Yeah.
It's not going to be an AI bot living follow up. How would you rate our service? Right? It's not anything like that.
Yeah. So as you look into the future of HOA law, bringing it back to the legal aspect, what are the areas where you think that the legislature is going to be shaping HOAs more and more? What do you think is going to be the middle of that bullseye of what's going to be addressed next?
Yeah, they're going to keep on doing with this kind of what I call right to, like, homeowners have a right to do something. We don't care what your documents say. Homeowners have a right to EV charging stations, personal food gardens, displaying religious symbols. They're nullifying essentially our private CC&Rs, right, which we used to have. And I think that's going to continue. I think what the legislature is going to do through the Davis-Sterling Act is actually codify a model set of CC&Rs such that we have to nibble around the edges, drafting rules and drafting those guidelines. And they're going to continue because these are lawmakers and they like to make laws, right? So there's going to be more and more technicality and more opportunities for associations to essentially get into trouble. So I guess it's a good thing. More laws, more lawyers for me. But at the same time, it's frustrating for our clients because a very common sense thing that they might want to implement some legislator in Sacramento said, no, I had a bad experience in my community. Therefore, you don't have that freedom anymore. We changed the law.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I had a conversation recently with somebody where we talked about the ability of boards to exercise reasonableness in how they interact with their homeowners in various types of situations. And maybe we can kind of end on this as to where you think things have been and where they're going, in the sense of where is there room for being human as a board member? And are we getting more or less opportunity to do that? And what I mean by that is we are humans living with each other in community, and there are people having real life experiences. And the phrase that is frustrating for me in board meetings is when somebody says, yeah, I understand that situation with this person, but I'm afraid of setting a precedent.
Yeah, that dirty P word.
That precedent concern often robs boards of doing what might be reasonable and human for a particular person. And so I know this is kind of a messy question, but just in processing that, do you see boards being restricted more and more from being human and being reasonable, or do you think that there's more opportunity for that?
There's actually, I think there's more, and I wish more of our clients, our boards would understand this. So while I say the legislature is regulating more, we've got this interesting dichotomy, because all the cases that have made their way through the appellate or Supreme Court within the last 5 or 6 years, they've all kind of hammered on one central theme. We're going to defer to the board's reasonable business decision. So you've got California, Sacramento saying, this is what the law is and you have to comply with it. And then when the board does something and that gets challenged, it goes to a court. The court says, who are we to decide? Homeowners don't like the way their board's running it. They can exercise that grievance at the ballot box, not in a court of law. So I do think there is that opportunity. And I think a lot of clients miss really the power that it is. If you've got a homeowner that's being a challenge or whatever the circumstance is, a lot of times the reaction is to, let's lawyer up, let's send them demands, let's send them correspondence. And so many times, can I just call this homeowner? Right? And in 20 minutes, what is your issue? Let me understand what it is that's going on with you. Well, let me kind of explain what the challenge is, but these are your neighbors, right? So you sue the association. It is a common interest because you have common funds. That's going to get tendered to your insurance carrier, right? Now your insurance premiums are going to go up. So you bring the lawyers in, you get upset about something, and what happens? Everybody has a bad taste in their mouth and assessments go up. Why don't we just solve the problem? This isn't life or death stuff here. You've got an architectural issue. You've got a parking issue. I'm your neighbor. Let's talk about it. That's one of the reasons why I love IDR. I think that's incredibly effective to do that. So I think board members, the more they embrace the idea and the opportunity, even though they might be a little hesitant to do that, to actually bring somebody who seems adverse closer to the board, invite them to a hearing, invite them to a board meeting. What's your problem? Let's talk about fixing it. I've seen clients get very effective results with that and not have to spend nearly as much as they were prepared to spend on attorney's fees. And I think that's a good thing.
So as we wrap things up here for this episode, following up on what you were just saying, you started this whole discussion referring to fiduciary duty. And you've kind of alluded to just now the business judgment rule. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to those issues, fiduciary duty, business judgment rule, and how that plays into this tension in an HOA where you're a corporation and you're a community? You're a corporation and you are a neighborhood. And you kind of have those dueling responsibilities as a board member. And sometimes when you're looking at a situation that comes up, you have a fiduciary duty. You have to meet the business judgment rule. Maybe you can just quickly explain both of those things. And is there room for board members to make decisions that might lean a little bit more towards the neighborhood than the corporation? Or is there, to be covered and to be safe by fiduciary duty and by business judgment rule, do they need to lean more towards the corporation perspective?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yes. It's interesting how you framed it because I don't think they're mutually exclusive, right? So my client is technically the corporation. I tell the board that. You're not my client. I'm going to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear, right? But as a fiduciary, right, quickly is, the board members have to make decisions on behalf of other people, putting their interests first, right? That's essentially what it is. It's the highest standard under the law. You're a corporate fiduciary and you don't even get paid to do this. But in our statutory scheme, because I started out in corporate law representing big corporations, in this micro corporation model, with all volunteers, how our legislature essentially has framed it is you have the freedom to make terrible decisions that, and you're still not going to be held liable, right? Based on the business judgment rule. As long as you were acting in good faith, you weren't trying to harm anybody, you ask questions, and this is the important part, you gathered the information from your experts, right? You relied on your management professional to give you guidance, or your reserve professional or your legal professional. Make that decision. And a lot of times that decision is what's best for the community in a long term. So I do think that there's avenues in which, you can nibble around the edges, but it's really just commonsensical things. And I think a lot of board members, sometimes if a homeowner is coming up and asking for something that the association might not have done before, almost reflexively, they say, no, we can't do that. And my question is, well, why can't we do that? Where does the law say that we can't do that? This is a community, right? This is your neighbor. If there's an opportunity to accommodate this request in a way that's somehow beneficial, why shouldn't we explore that option? And if we can't do it, then we should be prepared to explain to the homeowner, honestly, this is why we can't. We took your idea seriously. We think it's a good idea. We talked to our expert. This is the challenge that we're facing, but maybe we can find a different creative solution. Yeah. You get so much more with that.
Yeah, no, I love that. This episode is about how things are changing in the business. And what we're really wrapping up on is touching on, at least for me, how I'm changing in this business. I started off in the business, and it's very much here's how we do things kind of a business. And it's super easy to get sucked into that river of thinking. Mm-hmm. And I'm moving and have moved much more into, I want to see homeowners as human beings. I want to see people who live in our communities as having actual really good things that happen in their life and really bad things and really hard things, and that there's a community around this. And the HOA shouldn't be making things harder to enjoy the good things or struggle with the hard things. The HOA should be a positive impact. And to that end, and you said it needs to be commonsensical, I think that there might be a sense in which HOAs have a tendency to lose that because everybody is so regimented. Here's how we do things. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'm on a little bit of a campaign, even within our own company. No, let's do what's going to be right human to human. And we want to be legal, but there is a lot of room to do what's right for humans and still to do things in a legal and appropriate way.
Definitely. Yeah, I never understood the initial inclination to come from a place of no. The homeowner's asking us to do something. Yep. No, we can't. Why not yes? Why can we start at yes and then work to no rather than no and work to yes?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Steve, really appreciate you being part of this episode. And for those of you who have watched or listened to this episode, I hope that this was helpful for you. And I would encourage you to check out other episodes of The Uncommon Area. So thank you, everybody, for enduring through that. So I was going to open it up to say you can ask questions if you'd like, and we'll do a few minutes of Q&A if anybody has any questions. Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat the question so everybody can hear, and then I'll let you answer that. But the question is around precedents. If an association has been doing something a certain way for a long period of time, and then the board intentionally makes a decision and says, no, we're going to do something different from this point forward, are they constrained by the precedent from before, specifically in the realm of architectural application?
So just the big picture, no. And I get frustrated when I hear clients, and I understand that, right? Especially because there's a lot of attorney articles online that say, oh, it's precedent, and you've kind of lost your opportunity, right? Doctrinal latches, all those good things. Could you imagine how ridiculous the scenario would be? I've been, my community is 30 years old. A board that was seated 27 years ago didn't do something right and because of that, they changed the nature of the community in perpetuity, right? There's a reason why it transfers, right? So new decisions can be made. Commonsensical, I think, is what rules it, right? Because if you go into mediation, you got a mediator, right? Or even a court, there's a judge there. These are common sense people, right? They're going to read the things, but at the same time, maybe, what are we arguing about here? Your Honor, we don't want to prohibit, we don't want to allow that type of window in our community. But this homeowner is complaining because we allowed that other type of window. And the mediator is going to say, well, what's wrong with the window? Why? And if you've got a rational basis to say, well, this type of window, it was a one-off, it's totally inconsistent with our aesthetic style, or it's not good for our structural openings, or whatever it is, if you're able to assert something common sense, but, oh, okay, I can get it, right? You can do that. But so many times clients say, well, we want to keep doing this, and for what reason? And well, we don't really have a reason other than that's how it's always been done, that's going to be a losing argument every single time.
So would it be fair to say when it comes to questions of precedent, where there's not like really clear, definitive legal direction, that what a board really wants to think through is what's common sense, and then document it like crazy as to what your rationale is for that.
Yeah, there was a case a few years ago. A lot of communities have this, you can't park in your garage rule. And the board had never enforced it for 15 years. And the board said that our parking problem is absolutely out of control. We've never enforced this CC&R restriction. How do we start enforcing it? And they took a very common sense, community-based approach. They got out in front of it. Got an opinion from their legal counsel. We have an obligation to do this. So they started sending out messaging campaigns. Just so you know, 18 months from now, party's over. Right? And they kept doing that. And it was ultimately challenged. And it was very quick for the court to say, look at this model board, and stepping up and doing what they had, and they got in front of it. It's not as though they just flipped the script overnight and started towing people, right? Or finding people. So again, it's just kind of a common sense way of looking through things. And that's personally what I enjoy in this space. It's not so much the technical application of the law, because there's that, but there's also a huge human component that I think a lot of boards could be more effective if they really embrace. How are people going to receive this board action? How are people going to receive this news of a special assessment because we're underfunded, or we've got to do balcony repairs or something along those lines? The way in which you address those, I think a lot of times sets you up for success, even if a lawsuit's filed.
Yeah. We have time for another question or two. Anybody? Yeah. The question is along the lines of, if we're trying to be human and trying to be good neighbors and have a good community, how can we as boards be sensitive to people who have genuine needs and are not able financially or for whatever other reason to meet their obligations as a homeowner? Could a board, without risk of exposure to significant liability, take action to try to facilitate something that might help to meet that need for that homeowner?
I get it. Absolutely get it. Right. So no, it's not a yes, but no, I'm a get to yes. Don't you worry. I'm getting there. All right. So I have a client out in Menifee, age qualified community, senior community. They had a program whereabout they were actually pooling. The association was sponsoring this organization of homeowners. They're actually pooling and providing medical equipment to other homeowners. Crutches, things along those lines, and a massive claim gets filed. And I can't get into the details of it, but it was massive exposure for the association. Lawyers are correct when they say what my job is to the corporations. I'm here to mitigate what I call intolerable or unnecessary risk. There's risk in everything. Something like that, though, I think that is unnecessary risk for it to be under the banner of the association. And why is that? Is because there's a growing industry of plaintiffs' lawyers that are specializing in representing HOA or homeowners against their HOAs, right? Because they understand how fat our insurance policies are and how quick our carriers are to roll over. And they're great at what they do. So good. There's a couple of them that are actually, working in my firm now because they're such talented litigators, but they couldn't stomach, the cash grab kind of a place. And now they're on the other side. We call it, you're back on the side of the force, battling the dark side. So the way to get to yes is, hey, that's a beautiful thing. We want to do that as fiduciaries, right? That presents a certain level of risk that we can't expose the rest of the community to because we're wrapping it under the banner of the association. Same thing with like a neighborhood watch, same deal. So homeowners, you want to use the clubhouse and put together your own organization, absolutely. But the association formally, or even, in some respects, even informally, you want to keep an arm's length distance away from that. You can still achieve the same result without using the association's media channels, all those other types of things. Technically, these people become volunteers, right? Then they got to get on the workers' comp and the D&O policy, and then the plaintiff's lawyer, if something were to happen. I mean, it's a big cash grab. And unfortunately, I've seen circumstances where people who have solicited help and have exploited the good intentions and the empathy of their board actually turn that around against them when something went sideways. So that's the salty approach of it. So yeah, you can get to yes. Just keep the association out of it, because I don't think you're doing your job as a fiduciary if you take on that exposure unnecessarily. You can get there a different route.
Any other questions? Yeah. Can boards put incentives for homeowners to return their ballots to help facilitate quorum?
Or the answer is, I don't know if they can or if they can't, because we don't have a law or a case on it. But I tell my clients, sure, why not? Why not have a raffle? I don't want paying for ballots, right? Anybody who enters a ballot, right? Because put in a draw and then you get a free event.
A Batmobile.
Wow. Yeah, that HOA definitely needs to call me. It's one of those. So I don't think that there is an issue with that. It all comes down to common sense, right? But if you're able to give a homeowner a scenario in which the reason why I lost this election is because the board went door to door and said the association is going to give you some direct just by turning in a ballot rather than everybody participating, right? So there's both sides of the spectrum. And I think as long as you kind of stray within the common sense arena, in my experience, there's never going to be a judge or a mediator that says, oh, that's a terrible thing. Well, why not? We need to meet quorum. And what's the purpose that we're trying to meet quorum? So we can actually have the people who live here have a say in who's running the show. Right? I mean, I think that's a pretty strong platform to stand on.
Well, we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. What I would leave you with, it's interesting. This episode is all around what's the trajectory and the trends in the industry. We kind of landed back on this theme of boards use common sense. And I think that would be my encouragement. I think there's a lot of room for us as an industry and even us as a management company to just be better at taking a common sense approach and using that perspective to promote good community. So again, appreciate you all being here and for listening patiently. I really appreciate the time and enjoy the rest of the evening.